So I guess
We're
we are
live.
live streaming now. So hello everyone,
Hi.
and also hello Michael. Michael is my
Obrigado,
guest today.
Pedro.
Oh,
Hi.
by the way, nice. So my interview today is with Michael Finocchiaro, and Michael does not speak Portuguese, so the interview will be in English. But it's
Obrigado, Pedro, because it would have been hard otherwise. That's the one Portuguese word I know.
okay. Okay, it's fine. It's more than some people that I know, so it's it's perfect. So my theme for today's episode, it's PLM, basically PLM, like the past, the present, and the future. And why? Because Michael has worked in the PLM industry for a long time, for more than 3 decades, and Michael has an extensive career in PLM, having worked for big companies, for example, like IBM, HP, PTC, Dassault Systèmes, and so on and so on. Michael also has a consulting firm where he has advised multiple top tier companies, for example, like Airbus and Aras. By the way, for someone and who is watching and does not know what PLM stands for, it stands for Product Lifecycle Management, and there are different interpretations about its meaning. And I hope Michael does not get upset with mine, but
Should be fine.
I understand it as software which helps companies managing their data, particularly CAD data, like requirements, bill of materials, simulation data, and so on and so on. And it helps companies managing that data more efficiently. Michael is a PLM guru, and once more, it's a pleasure and a honor for having you here, Michael. So welcome to
My pleasure,
my
too.
podcast.
Thank you, Pedro. It's a privilege to be here as well.
Thank you. So um, when I was preparing my interview, I mean, I already knew Michael because I also work in the PLM area, and I follow Michael on LinkedIn for some time now, and I've also told this to Michael, but like the articles that Michael writes on LinkedIn are actually the ones that I have paper printed here because it's here because they are so fine. They are so good for learning about PLM that I've actually done that. So I consider Michael to be uh, a PLM guru. And Michael has a long career on PLM, as I just said before, and we may start in the past. So, Michael, how did you start your PLM journey? How did it get there?
Well, it started actually back in at university. I was at University of Florida because I'm originally from Miami, um, and I was doing robotics in grad school. And then I had a professor that had this IBM Unix workstation, and he was a CFD professor, so he was doing, computation fluid dynamics, but he couldn't see anything, and he was getting rather upset, and he called IBM. He actually talked to the chairman of IBM, John Akers at the time, saying, "Oh, this darn machine doesn't work." And John Akers hung up the phone and said, "You call the university, you send a student up here, and I don't want to ever hear from that guy again." And that student was me. So I went up to IBM to Kingston, New York. It was a lot colder than Miami. It was like in the winter, so like 6 feet of snow. It was quite an interesting experience. And
Hmm.
I was in this amazing group called the Graphic Systems Technical Center with these absolutely brilliant people who, a couple years after I left, several of them created a startup called Paper Software, and they created VRML, which was a standard for virtual reality markup language. Anyway, it was an incredible group, and I was basically writing and porting adapters and tuning graphics adapters on the IBM graphics card for AVS, Unigraphics, Pro Engineer, CATIA, CADS. I mean, every application that was a CAD application back in 1992. So you have to remember, this is at least 5, 6 years before Windows becomes the primary CAD platform in
Mm-hmm.
1998. And so Unix workstations still thought they had a really long life ahead of them, and they were investing a lot of money in graphics chips and so forth. And so I became sort of the expert in that. And after a couple of years, well, after graduating, I got a job with IBM, but they were no longer. They had divested that site. They had basically moved out of the Kingston site by then because they had consolidated all the manufacturing in New York up to Rochester, New York, and they had closed the mythic sites of Kingston, East Fishkill, and Poughkeepsie. And so there was nowhere to go. I ended up in Austin, Texas, when Austin was still weird. So that was pretty awesome because it was just like in the movie Slacker. I don't know if you were Pedro. If you, that's a movie to put on your list, Slacker by Richard Linklater,
Mm-hmm.
because that really is an epic movie about what Austin was like back then. Um, Anyhow, I did that for a couple of years. I ended up moving up to Boston because I missed the cold so much. And at Computer Vision, just before they died and were sent to PTC heaven. And during that time, the guy that was at Hewlett Packard at Dassault working on CATIA, well, it wasn't called CATIA V5 yet. It was still CNEX, but working on CATIA V5, left HP. And so IBM said, I mean, I was working for IBM, but basically HP called and said, "Do you want to move to France?" And I'm like, "What?" Well, yeah, we need somebody at Dassault that knows how to tune this stuff because we still got these graphic typers. And I was like, and so in 1996, I ended up moving to France. Not knowing any French, I had to learn it on the fly. And sorry, I didn't. It wasn't Portugal, so it wasn't Portuguese. It was French that I learned. Um, I have been to Portugal many times, though. By the way, I've been to Lisbon a
Oh,
bunch of
nice.
times, and to Brazil as well. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not like I'm unfamiliar with it. It just I was never able to learn it. Um, and so in terms, so all that to say that in 1998, after the NVIDIA released a GeForce, which was one of the first really low-cost, high-powered GPUs, which was, I would like to note, created for computer graphics to do CAD, not for games. The gaming stuff came much later. I mean, NVIDIA likes to say that they're trillionaires because of games. That might be the case, but the GPU would not have existed had MCAD not have pushed all the manufacturers, including the big Unix ones and NVIDIA and 3DFX, to create powerful GPUs. So anyway, by 1998, SolidWorks and Solid Edge had already and CATIA V5, which was released in 1999, had already destroyed basically the Unix market. Right, it never didn't
Mm-hmm.
exist anymore. All those companies ended up going out of business. Sun Microstations, Silicon Graphics, DEC was sold to HP. The IBM graphics division died. So basically, I figured, well, I'm not going to work for an Indian developer salary, and then there's no more graphics adapters, and everybody's already on OpenGL. So I was like wondering what I'm going to do, and then a friend of mine called, said, "Hey, Fino, you want to come? There's this conference on the Champs Elysees, win something," and it was actually James Heppelman and John Gibson presenting Windchill to the world. And I thought, well, that could be interesting. So I kind of jumped on that moving train. I was kind of lucky because HP already had a Windchill deployment up in Dublin for the inkjet division. And so I sort of became the de facto spokesman for PLM at HP. There were some consultants, but there was nobody doing like the hardware and the stuff I knew how to do. I did the world's first 5,000 user benchmark. Curiously, I did that benchmark on the HP campus, which is now the Apple Donut, because HP during the Carly Fiorina period, when I left, was selling off real estate like crazy. Anyhow, I ended up at I ended up doing this Windchill stuff for quite a while. And in terms of the definition of PLM, because you were asking about that,
Mm-hmm.
yes, it is about the management of that data. But when we talk about the data management part, we usually say PDM, product data management. So there were lots of historical PDM systems. There was IMAN, there was Metaphase, there was also VPM V4 was a PDM platform. And then of course there was Pro PDM and Pro Interlink at PTC. And Smart Team, of course, for
Mm-hmm.
SolidWorks. The thing is that though the big vendors, the particularly what became Siemens DISW, which was Unigraphics at the time, Parametric Technologies, and of course Dassault Systèmes, all saw that there was a lot more to managing CAD data. There was also, well, how do I deal with change management? How do I do configurations? How do I do, eventually someday this market might exist of configuration price quote, right? How do I do that? How do I enable that market? Um, how do I connect requirements to the rest of the life cycle? So the whole V and model-based system engineering, I can manage all the data around that. So we started thinking about the life cycle of the product from engineering to manufacturing to service, and therefore the name evolved into product lifecycle management. It's funny because Dassault Systems always claimed it was Bernard that created that term, but SimData claims it was actually Ed Miller that created the term. I don't know. I know Gartner also used it. Mark Halpern, my friend at Gartner, used it very early as well. So I'm not sure who we can credit for the name Product
Hmm.
Lifecycle Management, but for me, the definition is more of how do I manage the data across of a product during its entire life cycle. So uh, I can make sure that the things that are asked for as requirements are actually delivered to the final customer. And if there's a problem with the customer, I can trace back to the original engineering to make sure that that problem doesn't happen again and it's corrected really quick. Well, that it's corrected in manufacturing to give the customer something that works or in service, and that the engineering department doesn't make the same error a second time, right? That's sort of the whole purpose. There's actually, you said you were following my stuff. You certainly know that I have two podcasts of my own. I have one called The Future of PLM, where I talk to other thought leaders in PLM. And I have another one called AI Across the Product Lifecycle, where I talk to really exciting startups that are
Yes,
doing
yes, yes.
bleeding edge stuff with all the technology. Well, in the Future of PLM one, we've actually been debating in the last two episodes the future of PLM and the definition of PLM. And one of the conclusions we've had in that talking group is it's not a system as much as it is a process, right? Because there's been this myth in our industry that we can have a single source of truth, and people have thrown that on their slides for 15, 20 years, and it's false. There is no single source of truth. There will always be a bomb in the PLM system and another bomb in the ERP. Always. This will never change. So there's a guy that I like a lot. I've seen him. I just saw him last week at the SimData conference. Youssef Hushmand, Doctor
Hmm.
Youssef actually, and he has a great phrase he coined about 2, 3 years ago called the nearest source of truth, but a single source of change. So I think that that's a better definition, maybe of PLM, that these changes that we're going to do along the life cycle, they need to be traced in one single place so that all the systems upstream and downstream are sync with each other. Because what we don't want is two engineers making the same change on the same part and then not knowing which is the correct version, right? That's a classic problem, and yet still a pervasive problem that we're trying to solve with PLM. So sorry, that was a really long answer, but at least we got back to the definition of PLM, right?
Yes, but it's okay, Michael. I always say my guests don't be afraid to talk. I don't usually like to interrupt them, and it's good for me when they have like long answers and they are not afraid to tell like the complete story.
Absolutely.
Um, Something that I wanted to ask you regarding your first years of your career. For example, when you were working in HP and you were like supporting like windshield and so on, in that time the companies of where you were presenting the software, it was like a first PLM for them, or did they have like some kind of PLM system, or maybe a PDM already implemented?
It's there's a different set of there's a different maturity in different industries, right? Aerospace
Hmm.
has always been one of the forerunners in PLM. In fact, graphics came out of the McDonnell Douglas because McDonnell Douglas needed to manage the drawings that they were using to make the jet fighters they were building. Um, Automotive is also a prime example because Toyota and Honda and GM and Ford all have had a need for managing extremely complex products with a wide variation in terms of configurations. So those industries have always had some form of PDM. What's interesting, in having talked to Tony Affuso, who is the head of Unigraphics, even EDS Unigraphics, and he was at GM even before that. Back in the 80s, he had a massive budget. I don't remember, it was the million. I think it was in the millions, but I think if you put it in today's dollars, it might even be over in the billions. But he had a huge budget for what they called the C4 program. So it was CAD, CAM, CAE, and CIM. It was a industrial compute for manufacturing information, and that's actually where SimData got its name, because it was IBM that asked Ed Miller to size the market at where all this industrial manufacturing is happening with computers, because we don't quite know how big that market is. So the concept has been there. It's just, and in fact, what's really was visionary back in when Tony was running that program, he was already thinking of, well, all this stuff around graphics should just be plumbing, because what's really important is how you build the apps on top of it to make this information work, and how do you get the different disciplines to talk to each other. Unfortunately, that was it took a long time to get there, because the technologies of CAD and of CAE and all these other downstream technologies are all quite different, and they didn't necessarily all come from the same place, right? Dassault may have been the first one to really think in the broader picture, because they started acquiring very early. Well, they did the acquisition of SolidWorks, of course, for the mid-market, but they also acquired the companies that became Delmia, like Delta and Deneb Robotics. So they bought several companies that that were doing manufacturing and robotics for manufacturing, and that became the Delmia brand. They also bought, of course, Abacus, and that became the Simulia brand. So they were thinking in that wider zone of, how do I get away from just managing CATIA data to managing the entire process for fabricating very complex products. And then, of course, PTC did the same thing when they acquired Windchill, because they only had PDM. And then around, I think it's around 1996, 97, they acquired Computer Vision, which had already acquired Windchill. So they got Windchill, and that became, of course, their flagship PLM. Dassault, of course, evolved from V5. They created a VPM V5, which was a Innovia V5, which in theory was a more enterprise level thing. It had its problems, and that's why they started developing V6 rather quickly. But it was also the concept around V6 was a bigger tent, right? How do we connect the data of all these other acquisitions around different disciplines in order to have a single picture on top? And so, yeah, I think it's interesting to see how the industry evolved. Okay. So back to your question, though, you were saying what industry. So I would say that especially aerospace and defense and automotive had the need, because they were managing these products on a global scale with multiple factories in multiple countries, with products of hundreds of thousands or even millions of parts. Industries that were less mature with smaller things could afford to just keep using Excel or however they were doing it by hand. And so there was adoption, but the adoption was a slower pace, and not necessarily single vendor, right? They were a lot of them would buy, the best in class from each vendor and try to hobble it all together. Over time, as those other portfolios I mentioned got more mature, those, of course, the big three tried to acquire as much as they could in order to cement their place and get it. That being said, there are some industries that are still resisted and have still remained relatively immature, like AEC BIM, the BIM market. It's big, and Autodesk owns it, and yet in terms of digital maturity, they're not really great, right? There's still a lot of them are still using hand printed documents in 2D and contracts rather than Fusion or the Autodesk BIM platform, or the one from Dassault for that matter. It varies in terms of the industry, I'd say. And then the other one I would mention is like process industries. chemistry,
Mhm.
uh, stuff like that. Those are also industries that, well, let me put it another way. Uh, PLM, when we talk about PLM, we're usually referring more or less explicitly to discrete manufacturing when we're building a part or a car or something solid, right? When you're
Yes.
doing continuous or batch manufacturing, when you're making soda pop or you're making soap or you're making rubber, these are continuous or batch processes, which also need a PLM. But that PLM is managing formulas, ingredients, specifications, labeling and packaging,
Mhm.
things that are not really that important or not as important to discrete manufacturing. Okay, labeling and packaging is important for consumer goods, but it doesn't matter, right? You don't put an airplane into a box, there's no labeling and packaging management there. It's really restricted to CPG, and then CPG has all these products that are basically liquids or some kind of emulsion, and therefore they need all the other stuff. So those companies have also been plagued with a bit of immaturity because a lot of their downstream processes are in asset lifecycle management, right? Because it's more about managing the pumps and managing the actual factories. And that's where Hexagon and Aveva have historically been very important. You have seen Infor and Oracle and parts of Siemens be able to act there. But it's sort of a different kind of PLM. And the other kind of PLM I think that's different is retail and fashion.
Mhm.
Because it has a very different BOM. The BOM is far more complex because it has to deal with colorway, season, size, male, female, button or zipper. The variability is almost exponentially greater than that
Mhm.
of the variability in an airplane, which is, or let's say a car, 2-door, 4-door, 5-door. I mean, there's a lot of variability, but it's not as complex as a retail BOM, and so those solutions tend to be separate. They tend to The BLM vendors have tried to produce generic solutions for them, and they've almost always failed and had to acquire somebody. PTC couldn't do it with Windchill; they acquired Flex PLM. Dassault couldn't do it with Innovia; they acquired Centric Software. Um, I don't know. Sorry, it was maybe I'm answering a different question, but I think
It's
there's
okay. It's okay.
I think there's three primary flavors of PLM, if you will. Discrete manufacturing, I would say, is the most mature, and that
Yes.
maturity is pretty much around aerospace, defense, automotive, and industrial equipment. And then secondarily, it's done marine and offshore and other pieces of the business, energy, consumer goods, electronics. Um, and the second one, I guess I would say, is process industries, which are a much lower maturity, and they typically are not treated by the same three companies that are big and discrete: Siemens, PTC, Dassault. They're usually treated by Infor, Oracle, or Aveva, or Hexagon. Well, the PLM is in for Oracle or somebody else, and the asset lifecycle management part, which is equally important, is treated by Hexagon or Viva. And then you have fashion, which is its own kind of microcosm, and that is primarily Flex or Centric or a host of little tiny solutions out there.
That's interesting. By the way, when you were talking about like the BIM industry, what's the reason you believe like the for their that maturity is very low compared to the other industries you have talked about?
I think it's hard to show an ROI. I mean, the transition from 2D to 3D, from paper to digital is expensive. There's an initial cost, and a lot of the contractors don't understand the benefits, and they just don't have the margins in order to pay for it, right? You find this also sometimes in smaller, like I was mentioning the process industry. If you look at relatively smaller companies doing candy bars, not Mars, not like a global one, but a smaller one, they may not need it either because they're only dealing with one marketplace. In fact, I had an interview with, I won't name it, but a American company that does fruit juice, and they said that they didn't need PLM until they were selling their fruit juice outside of the United States, when they only
Hmm.
had the one formula that was applicable to the United States and met the the guidelines for food and the Food and Drug Administration, it was perfectly fine to do it in Excel. As soon as they had to leave and go to European Union with the Byzantine matrix of incredibly difficult and complicated flavors and taste of different countries, because the Portuguese want it slightly different than the French, who want it more. It just became impossible to manage, and so they needed a PLM. So I think it's a cost thing. There's an awareness problem, and then there's the cost of implementation problem.
That's interesting. That's an interesting story. Also, regarding the like the concept of buying and implementing a PLM, do you believe that today the cost and the effort is significantly lower than when you started, or how do you compare like the present times with the past times?
Well, um, that one is a little complicated to answer as well, because if you're starting greenfield, right, you there's no legacy, so you're
Yes,
creating a new
assume that.
electric car. In that
Yes, yes,
case, it's probably a little faster because you don't have to deal with the legacy, right? And it's probably a little cheaper because most of the solutions are SaaS. So you're just gonna get the thing online. You're not going to have 6 months of negotiation for getting down the piano lower, and then the customization will primarily be just stuff on the cloud. So you probably need fewer consultants, and it'll just be on the cloud. So you don't need to train your IT guys and deploy more virtual machines into your own infrastructure. It's a lot simpler in that vein, because back in the day, you had to size it, and you had to buy machines, you had to put them in the data center, you had to have consultants from the vendor to get it set up, then you had to consultants from Capgemini or Accenture to put in the business plan and spend millions of dollars trying to put out an 18-month rollout in order to get all the customization right. It was a very involved, expensive process depending on the size of your company and the amount of customization needed. Um, SaaS has, of course, changed that, as I said, for Greenfield, but I'd say 95% of the market. The problem is that even if it's faster to get started on a SaaS solution, you can't ignore the technical debt you have to your legacy. And so that's really the difficulty today. How do I evolve the way I'm working so I can take advantage of agentic AI and generative AI? But how do I do that in the context of I've already got 15 years of legacy data sitting in a system that I've had for 10, 15, 20 years? Um, how do I deal with that data? How do I integrate that? How do I not lose all that know-how and all that history? That's one of the big challenges I think that they face.
hmm Regarding SaaS today, in your experience, like clients, they want like the cloud, or they still want like an on-premise solution? Do they still fear the cloud, or you don't notice that trend anymore?
I don't think that well, I mean, we've been talking about cloud now for well, actually, we've been talking about cloud for 40 years, because it used to be called VM, VM when it was digital, and it was called a mainframe when it was IBM, right? I mean, we're doing collective computing that at a distance for a long time. Um, Currently, what we have is a cloud ecosystem with three primary vendors, sort of like the three we have in PLM, right? You have Google, Azure, and AWS
Hmm.
that own 95% of the market. Um, I think that there's nobody that doesn't have at least a part of their infrastructure on the cloud, whether it's Salesforce or Zoom or some other piece, right? Uh, Engineering data has always been a bit of a different case, because people feel that this is sort of the family jewels. We really got to keep this
Yes, yes.
behind closed doors, um, and so there's been resistance to that. I think that the resistance, a lot of it has been due to outside the United States. Well, inside the United States, I'd say the resistance was, well, I'm not going to be able to pass spec, and you're not secure enough, and I'm not going to be able to become a contractor for the American military because I won't have SOC 2 or whatever military certification I need in order to do business, right? And so there's a lot of pressure to a lot of people stay on prem just because they need to stay in business. And same thing in, say, medical devices, where the the FDA has these very strict legislation around
Hmm.
the introduction of pharmaceuticals and so forth. And if the cloud is not up to date on all those specifications, then they could lose out on a drug release, which would make them lose billions of dollars. Because if you're not on the market before somebody else, then you basically lose the market. Um, in Europe, I think the primary concern and the thing that's holding things back is sovereignty, right? Because it's nice if you have your data in the cloud, but if the Americans can just say, well, actually, we don't care about European legislation. If we want the data, we're just going to get it. And then Microsoft said, sure, okay, we're going to give it to you. We don't care. Um, that's kind of problematic for a lot of companies that don't want necessarily another country to get access to their secret stuff. Um, so you do have a few clouds in Europe, such as Outscale, that's owned by Dassault, or
Hmm.
OVH here in France. Um, they're not necessarily, well, the data centers tend to be in Europe and not as global as the other three, but at least they can allay some of the concerns around security and ITAR and things like that. So I don't think it's fear of the cloud as much as it is um, the practicalities of doing business in a complex international environment that's highly regulated. And how do I get around that in order to do it? Because everybody acknowledges that with the cloud, things are far easier to collaborate, far easier to work in a global environment. Um, on the other hand, and also, I think most people have realized that the security of data in the cloud is probably at least as good, if not better, than the security on-prem, in the sense that cloud data center is usually in more or less a fortress, protected by some private security firm. You're not getting anywhere near a cloud data center, right? You don't even know where they are. And the security in there, you've got to pass 15, 20 background checks. It's super secure. So the only way it will be through hacking, and yet that would be the same on premise as well. In fact, the problem on prem is that anybody could walk in the data center with a USB key, and it happens all the time. So
Hmm.
I don't think that the security tends to be the issue. I think it's more sovereignty and then regulatory compliance that holds people back when they're a bit reluctant.
Regarding cloud security, that's an interesting theme because one of the things that you have made, you have written like the original white paper for 3D Experience platform, cloud security and privacy, right? Um, that's also an interesting point because that was written when in 2014, I guess.
Something, yeah. When we released through the Experience platform, yeah.
Yes. If you had to rewrite that document today, I mean, the landscape has changed a lot, or it's almost the same as in 2014. So would you like add or change a lot of stuff in that document?
Honestly, I'm not. I don't think there would be that much to change. I mean, we still have the same. I mean, a lot of my document is about OWASP, which is the Open Web Application Security. Is it protocol? The P. Basically, it was a list of the top 10 vulnerabilities that are always evolving, and then the
Hmm.
countermeasures to those that all enterprise software should implement. That hasn't changed. That's still the standard for doing that. We also talked in that document about the standards. Of course, maybe the SOC 2 has a few more things that are part of it. Maybe there's some other emerging standards that are not in that document that have come out since 2014. But fundamentally, the premises of on which I wrote that paper have not really changed. Your data
Hmm.
has to be secure. You've got to be able to you got to be able the cloud's got to be able to manage access control, and
Hmm.
you've got to be able to do security in depth, because that was one of the big themes in that white paper, was security in depth, and that concept has not changed because it gives you kind of a shelled approach. So even if the thief gets behind level one, there's like level two, level three, level four before he actually gets to uh, or she or it, because it's probably a bot,
Mm,
um, gets anywhere near the really important data. So no, I'm not sure that, other than any specific protocols or any specific legislation that has come up since 2014, other than some specifics, I think the principles would remain the same.
oh, interesting. Um, Concerning your experience in Dassault System, one of the things that I've always wondered as like an end user. So let's imagine today I'm seeing like a new feature or like a new software architecture, and I think, oh, it is amazing. It's the first time I'm seeing this as an end user. But like, how much time in advance have like the infrastructure architects to they how much time in advance they have to like to decide the stuff. For example, like if like a feature or like a new architecture is launched on the market, usually how much time in advance did you plan that?
Um, it depends on how big a change you're talking about. Um, so an architectural change, or a major user interface change, like the change between V6, where each application had its own user interface,
Hmm.
and 3D Experience, where there was one user interface. That was like 3 years, because that was the work we did from around 2012 to around 2014. And even that wasn't done, right? We changed the compass, what, 4 or 5 times since then. Just the look
It's
of the
true.
compass itself was changing all the time. Um, in general, with software as complex as 3DX, and I think it's probably also the case for Siemens or PTC, it's probably looking at 18 to 24 months to get a requirement or a feature into the development stream, and behind, which is behind, by the way, all the things that were asked for by the most important customers, which are always going to get priority. To get that into the stream, developed, tested, retested, redeployed, announced, and then released. I think it's about 18 months, um, depending on the priority. If it's something that's security related, I think all three vendors would, of course, put that on a fast track, because we cannot be exposing customers' data to attacks. So if it's a functionality related, yeah, I would say 18 months, 12 to 18 months, maybe, hopefully not longer than that, but something like that.
Hmm. Interesting. Also concerning your time in Dassault system, while I was reviewing your LinkedIn experience section, I noticed that you moved from global V6 infrastructure architect to marketing director. um it's quite a change. So
Yeah.
how did your like day-to-day activities differ like from when you were an infrastructure architect to a marketing director? What were the challenges that you had to face in that time?
Thank you, Pedro. Well, what happened was that I was in R&D, but I was working on this platform, which was still V6. We hadn't even imagined 3D experience yet. And and R&D was a very special, particular environment. I had talked to a friend of mine that I knew at PTC, that had become head of marketing in the Novia brand, and I said I would like to understand more of that dark side, as we used to call it as technical people. Um, and in fact, since Innovia at the time was both an application suite of PLM applications, like Requirement
Hmm.
Central, Designer Central, and so forth. These were all centrals, were the old Matrix One term for basically a suite of applications. Um, and it was also a platform. It was the V6 platform, so it actually had this dual role. He needed actually someone on the team that understood that platform really well in order to explain it in terms of the marketing stuff. So I came over to the marketing side, but as the platform guy, to explain this, to do a better job of explaining the platform to people. And in that role, I was able to look at the user interface. In fact, I had this relatively famous meeting where I basically tried to I can't take any credit for the current 3D Space platform, but I was already talking about some of the critical things we needed to do to the user interface to make it more usable, more intelligible, and more popular, because it was probably the most hated user interface on the market at the time. Uh, nobody will stand up and say they loved a Matrix One they loved putting it in place 'cause it was super easy and fast, but the user
Mhm.
interface, the user experience, particularly as late as the 2010, was really showing its age. Right, it needed an update. Actually, some people make good money on that, right? Technia wrote their own framework on top of V6 and did very well because they did what Dassault was not doing, and that was a good business model for them. However, I did that for a couple of years. I started a community of architects because there was this DS Swim, which is the community stuff, the sort of a Facebook for enterprise inside of DS, and they had a community that had like two people in it. Like the latest post was 6 months old, and I said, I'd like to take that over, please. And I changed the name because it was just architecture community or something like that. And I said, well, no, let's call it the V6 pack, the V6, and then PLM architect community. And by the way, six pack in English means like a six pack of beer. So there was also that implication. I actually did throw a beer keg party at one of the kickoffs, which was a lot of fun when we were in Miami or Orlando, close enough to home. So anyway, I had this community, and I was basically demystifying the PLM architecture for the field, and it became very popular. We had over 3,500 members of this community before I left. And I would do these podcasts, like I'm glad you're doing this, Pedro. It's great. I would also do podcasts even back then and on WebEx, which was the infrastructure we used at the time.
Mm.
And I broke WebEx almost every time because I would have 500-600 people all trying to talk, and WebEx was just kind of blowing up. But it was good, and people still remember with fondness these podcasts because I was. And the echo of that today is at my website. I call it demystifying PLM because I thought the word was pretty catchy, and people can relate to it because, as you've pointed out, even at the beginning of this conversation, it's not an easy thing to explain. So I think demystifying is a good way of trying to help people understand something as complicated as it is.
Yes, it's true. It's not always easy to explain what PLM is. I'm talking about from my own experience with like talking to prospects and so on. It's not always easier. Of course, it's getting easier um, as the time passes because, as you have told before, it's now way easier to implement like a PLM system than it was like 15 or 20 years ago. But it's still a challenge for us because, and I once again talking from my own experience, um, people in the industries I work with, like the CAD, it's something that they are used to. Uh, they don't talk about like drawing in paper anymore, but solution that is specific for managing their data, that is although they have like a lot of the problems that you have described before. For example, things as simple as like they don't know what's the latest revision on on a specific assembly on a specific part, and they have like the risk of sending the wrong part to manufacturing, and that happens. But it's curious because it's not always easy to explain PLM to them. It's a challenge that I have, but well, it's my day today, so it's my day today.
It pays the bills, right?
Yes, it's the way it is. Um, Still concerning your Dassault's years, then you moved like to a senior director job in Dassault, like senior director of 3D Experience Platform. So was did the scope of your job increase a lot from like the marketing director, or
Well, so it was a little bit more complicated than that. Back in 2000, and so this had been 12 or 13, maybe 14. The problem is that when we launched 3D Experience Platform, Innovia was no longer the platform, right? The platform was 3D Experience.
Mhm.
So I could not be the 3D Experience guy sitting in the Innovia brand. That would make no sense. And at the time, Pascal Delos, who is now the CEO, but at the time he was the guy owning the brands, which is the job that Philip Lofer holds today. Uh, Pascal didn't want to create a brand for the 3D Experience platform. Actually, the irony is that now in 2026, they will create that brand and they'll combine it with NetVibes, and Morgan Zimmerman, the
Mm,
CEO of the NetVibes brand, will become the head of the 3D Experience platform. But back, 10 years ago, that was clearly not going to happen. Um, and so they didn't know where to put me. So basically, that was just a lateral move over to BT, because they used to have a separate sales channel for the large enterprises. They call it business transformation, and so they kind of pigeonholed me over there because they didn't have anywhere else to put me. It was a bit uncomfortable, and that's one of the reasons why in 2017 I left and decided to carve my own path. But basically, it was sort of more or less, I was doing the same things. I was doing this evangelization of the platform. I was talking with the R&D teams to understand what was happening. I was working on the marketing materials for what the platform was going to look like in a go-to-market. I was talking to customers. I was helping out the architects in the field to make sure it worked and they understood what worked and what didn't. So my job actually didn't change that much. It's just that I couldn't stay where I was because the definition of where I was had fundamentally changed.
mhm, mhm. So when you decided to carve your own path, what were yours like goal was to like, oh, now I'll be like helping and consulting like the end customers, or I'll be like a consulting for the like the solution providers. How did it
Uh,
evolve?
Both. Initially, I tried to get some consulting, and I was able to get some consulting on, you know, architecture assessments or performance assessments with a handful of customers like Bobston and General Electric, Medical, and a few others. But at the same time, because I do have pretty deep market knowledge, I was able to sell projects like competitive analysis to even one major PLM vendor, and a couple of the up and coming ones. Then COVID happened, and all those jobs disappeared because everybody kind of
Mm,
folded in on themselves. It was the end of the world, and I joined a small PTC reseller that's called Percol, because they needed someone who knew PLM and PDM, to take their solution they had built on ThingWorks to other companies that used to have this old PDM called Optigra. Unfortunately, there were no other companies that were in that situation, and therefore I spent 2 years looking for companies that didn't exist. And as soon as I could, I decided that was not the right path. Which, in retrospect, now that PTC just sold off ThingWorks to TPG last week, that might have been the right thing to do. And so since then, I've been doing a lot of work. I've worked a bit with um, several startups like Duro and Propel and Shaper, and I've also been working a lot with the other PLM we haven't mentioned today yet, but ARIS, which is the ARIS Innovator platform, is number 4 in the PLM world. It also works with very large companies, and it's a lot more open. It's probably the most open, flexible platform on the market today. They're just a considerably lot smaller than PTC, which is the
mhm,
smallest of the big three. And now, besides that, I realized how interesting this startup market was, and I started studying it this year. And I started an Airtable database with like 47, 48 columns, measuring headcount and funding and strengths and weaknesses, but also quantitative measurements on market opportunity, team and execution, financial performance, growth metrics, industry impact. I'm missing one. I don't know. Team and execution. Maybe I said that already. And then there was also competitive mode. So I've got 7 metrics, and so I could measure them. And I've built this database up to 370 about right now. And I've been talking to the founders. I've talked to founders of about 100 of them, and I do a lot of I do a lot of posts about them. I did one last week on a really exciting one in Germany called Elevating Patterns, and that post got 14,000 impressions from
mhm,
Friday to today. So it was very, very a really nice performance on that one. And so it's been really exciting because it shows that you don't necessarily have to go to the big three to get the most innovative software. There are other companies providing really exciting software and disrupting a bit of the way we do things. There was actually a comment on one of my posts where one of the other thought leaders said, "But Fino, why do you keep talking about these things that nobody's doing?" And I said, "But these people are doing this. I mean, there are companies already using agentic AI. Not maybe not the biggest ones with the biggest technical debt, but there are smaller A&D companies, drone companies, EVs, autonomous aerospace companies. You know, that are 10 to 100 people. They're startups, but funding at several $billion sometimes, that are using Intop or using these newer platforms, and not only going to the big three because they're too small, they can't afford it, and they need to go faster, and they want the latest and greatest. So it's a really fascinating market, and I'm glad to be becoming sort of an evangelist for these people.
Mhm. Regarding that, like the startup market, um, like, do you believe that the AI boom that it exploded, like it greatly expanded the startup market after the popularization of ChatGPT and so on? Do you notice like a growing trend on the like rising startups because of AI?
Uh, I think there's a lot more money from the VCs because they see it as the next big thing. And I think that some of the entrepreneurs have thought, well, some of the people have left the big companies to go startups because they thought, I want to do something that's going to change the world, and AI could be a way to do that. Um, I think AI is, when you listen to some of the podcasts I've done with different founders, they've
Hmm.
realized how much faster they can develop if they have a fully AI empowered tool chain, which they can't necessarily get at Siemens or PTC or DS because they have, again, this legacy technical debt in terms of their infrastructure. And so a lot of these startups are very moving fast and doing very well precisely because they're leveraging AI in the entire tool chain. They're using AI in getting better results faster. Um, for example, I think it was Michael Core of Duro said that initially it had taken 3 years or 4 years to write the first version of Duro. And when he
Yes,
said,
yes.
okay, we're going to rewrite it in AI, using AI, and for example, all the interfaces, rather than coding an interface by hand, that's what an AI is really good at, because the AI can go see, what's the input and output of A, and here's the input output of B, and just so that's what he did. And he said it took like 6 months. So from 3 years to 6 months, and you can see that trend across all 14 or so startups I've talked to. That the time to from an idea to a working solution has come down to considerably. And that's not saying they're using Lovable to create engineering software. That I'm not saying that. It's not just, I'm not typing in the code and free speech is saying create me a new CAD product and boom, there's a CAD product. No, this is using AI in the sense of I'm using a coding assistant like Cursor, right? Which is the biggest one today. There was Windsurf. People are using Cursor. People are using very advanced ways of machine learning to get better results out of their data. They're taking advantage of all these this whole convergence of technologies that we've called AI, which are actually large language models and the way of talking to a computer rather than typing to it. They've been able to use that to create just amazing stuff. And so I think there has been a bit of an uptick, a bigger uptick than before, because people see the possibilities a bit more. And the industry seems to be ripe for this because we've been kind of in stasis for so long with the same three solution sets. I think people are some customers or some companies are looking for something new, something a bit more disruptive than what we've seen necessarily before.
Yes, I remember reading the Innovator's Dilemma book some years ago, and that book was written well before. I think it was written like 1999 or so, and it said something like this: great technological disruptions can topple giants while creating new leaders. Do you believe that that's the case with the AI and the PLM market? That like the big three can be shaken by these new startups one day?
It's a tricky one. Ultimately, yes. I think that the the big three are being forced to go a little faster than they're comfortable with in order to stay competitive. Um, the I- Again, it all comes down to technical debt because there's a certain amount of technical debt you can absorb with a new solution and a certain amount that you can't. And as long as there are proprietary interfaces and protocols on top of the older legacy systems, it's going to be harder to just slap an MCP in front of them and suck in that data into some new system. That being said, as again, I interviewed Sebastian Volkel of a startup called Dallas. He's based in San Francisco. It's a company doing model-based system engineering, and he points out that smaller startups, like 15 to 50 people, are winning contracts for defense equipment. I'm talking about
Hmm?
defense manufacturers, but like drone stuff that's
Yes,
relatively
yes.
less complex than an entire, stealth bomber or something. They're winning these contracts against the DSs and Siemens and PTCs because they're more agile, they're faster, they can integrate more exciting tools, and so there is already disruption happening at the lower end of the mid market, and maybe that'll percolate up. At one point, the big three will have to adjust, or they're going to have to buy some of these startups in order to keep up. But the pressure will come from the bottom up as customers see what can be done and say, but I want to do this too, and you're holding me back rather than allowing me to go forward. That's not saying there's not innovation in those three companies. There's a lot of innovation, but it may not be the innovation at the time the customer wants it. They might want something that doesn't exist, and we need to give them that.
That's really interesting. So you believe it's the reason it's more like because of like technological stuff, not for example like pricing related and so on, right?
I think
Like the
it's more
reason.
technological. Well, the pricing, I mean, some of the AI tools aren't cheap. NTOP isn't cheap. And yet, NTOP's one of the only softwares that knows how to do what it does in terms of implicit design. Uh, and again, we talked already about SaaS, but most companies have already done that SaaS journey, right? At least part of their infrastructure is already on SaaS, whether it's a CRM or whatever. Um, so yeah, I think it's more. I think it's more technology driven in terms of what they want to do and how. Because at the end of the day, they need to differentiate themselves against the other hardware companies that they're competing against. And the only way
Mhm.
they're going to do that is taking some new stuff, whether that's in the manufacturing world, the simulation world, or the design world, in order to give that little bit of an edge that gives them that little bit of better in their POC or their demo to the DoD or wherever, in order to win that big contract. And unfortunately, that's where the money is today, right? It's all this insane military buildup we've seen because of the two conflicts, major conflicts at the moment. Hopefully, those will subside someday, and we can work on something else. But that's really what's driving a lot of the market and PLM, and a lot of the innovation. Well, that, and then of course electric vehicles, autonomous vehicles,
Yes,
robotics. I
yes.
mean, some of these other exciting things. To a lesser degree, maybe newer forms of power like fusion. Fusion generators that also are being redesigned based on generative geometry, generative CAD. That was addressed in my podcast with Quantient, which is a Finnish company applying quantum techniques to real life engineering problems, and they were saying that um, one of the reasons that fusion has been held back is that at absolute zero, it's really hard to stabilize the plasma long enough to do uh, the chemical interaction you need in order for a fusion to take place. And we couldn't even conceive of the impossible geometries required to stabilize the plasma in these ever changing electromagnetic fields. Now, with generative design, we're starting to be able to imagine and even manufacture with 3D printing these impossible geometries, meaning that I think fusion might happen in our lifetimes. We might have uh, practical fusion that that actually generates more energy than it consumes creating it. Um, and it's interesting also to see that uh, in the same manner that uh, CAD, generative CAD is helping fusion, AI is helping quantum, because the problem in quantum computing is that you're working at a few millidegrees above absolute zero. And absolute zero is basically there's no energy, right? You're at a zero energy state. So anything that produces noise, that raises the energy state above a few millidegrees, destroys the results. So basically, they're using AI to filter out any elements from the exterior so that it remains as quiet as possible for the quantum stuff to do its magic. So it's interesting to see AI is helping us get to the quantum revolution, and the generative design is helping us get to fusion. So at one point, we're going to need both, because we're going to need fusion because of the demand of power by Gen AI. As you've seen, the power consumption is pretty much insane. The only way we're going to keep up with that is going to be fusion, because fission is just too dangerous, right? In most cases. And then quantum is just going to be yet another incredible leap. So I don't know. I've got this crazy feeling that it might happen in my lifetime, that I see AGI, generalized artificial intelligence, and quantum, and fusion that all happen at the same time, roughly, because they're all sort of dependent on each other. I don't know, crazy stuff, right?
But there is also a question I would also like to ask you regarding this. For example, like regarding AI and PLM, what bold predictions do you have, for example, for the next 10 years?
I don't know if we can even go out more than 2 or 3 years, Pedro. It's changing so fast.
Yes, things
Uh,
are changing real fast.
well, so I've started a series of articles last week about uh, that question of how is AI going to change PLM. I think the first phase was this phase we've lived since 2023, which was co-pilots, right? That you put an
Hmm.
AI on top of the documentation, and you basically have a chat bot for figuring out how to do stuff, right? The second phase is the phase we're in now, which is the agentic phase. So now let's use AI agents in plural. One is not sufficient. You need many, and you need to train them or have them focused only on one subset of data, like just requirements, so they don't hallucinate and try to tell you how beautiful your project is as you're trying to do a requirement, because that's the biggest problem, is this stupid these kinds of hallucination problems, which I still see way too often. So the agentic phase, we're still working on it. Eris has already announced an architecture there. Dassault has told me about theirs. I know that Siemens and PTC are also working on it. So I think that uh, within the next 2 to 3 years, each PLM platform will have an agentic front end. There'll be human front end, but there'll be an agentic front end, because the agent, um, you know, basically the agents will be doing a lot of the heavy lifting behind some kind of orchestrator in order to give you what you want. So if you wanted me to look forward, say like 3 to 5 years, because 10 years I wouldn't dare. Well, 10 years I'll say I think we've got quantum at least, and probably we're almost there with fusion and everything. But in terms of the engineer in CATIA or SolidWorks or NX or Creo or whatever tool they're using, maybe it'll be Intop or something else, whatever tool, I think that they will be sitting inside their CAD tool, and they will think to themselves, oh, can I manufacture it? And the agent will say, oh, I've got 3 tools for that. Hold on. I checked, and actually that thing you need to move, and that one we can't do it like that. But other than that, you're good. So, by the way, you want me to do the change for you, or do you want to do it yourself? And then you're going to think, well, but are you sure we're going to come into spec in terms of pricing? Let me check. Actually, the sourcing of that part is problematic. So we're actually going to have to give you 3, 4, or 5 alternates. And in fact, in this geometry, we'll probably sell this one. So we probably need to create a new configuration based on this sourcing issue, so that we get a new configuration number. it creates a new SKU number, but don't worry, I can take care of that if you want. So this is what it's going to cost. So I think that we're going to see this thing where you're going to see a blending of all these different disciplines that were used to be completely separate, right? You used to have, you do design and then you throw it over the fence to somebody in the simulation department to do FEM and all that stuff. They would say, okay, they would come back to the engineer. The engineer would work on the E-bomb. Then he'd have to throw it over the fence again, and the mechanical engineer would catch it and he would do the E-bomb. All that stuff is going to be compressed. And a lot of that, the manual labor will be done by agents rather than by humans. And so, as my friend Sebastian Massio likes to say it, the idea of like I have an idea in my head and boom, I've got I've got a product that comes out. This will be more get closer to the case, particularly the smaller the product is. Almost
Mhm.
the time that you can think of it, the product will be able to be manufactured.
It's amazing.
Well, that's sort of the vision. I think is where we're heading. Is that I think the engineer has a role to play because the engineer has years of training on how things actually work in the real world. Because one thing the AI will never know is what it's like to sit in a car. He doesn't know what it's like to roll the window down and feel the breeze going through his hair. They don't know that. So there will be intangibles that humans will always be there to add. Um, but hopefully all the plumbing, the really boring stuff, like, what is the tolerance on this, and what's the torque? I mean, who cares, right? That's not, hopefully the human's role becomes more creative and more imaginative and more innovative than just bits and bytes and tolerances and finishing, right?
Interesting. Still, with respect to AI in the PLM area, um, like today, 2025, what do you believe it's already returning ROI, and what do you believe it's still like just hype? And
No, it's
also,
definitely, yep. Sorry, go ahead.
sorry,
End of the
just
question.
the last one regarding this set of questions, and from like all the founders that you have met in the companies, what has impressed you the most regarding like technological results?
Okay. So if I start with where we're seeing ROI,
Hmm.
um, certainly with co-pilots, you're seeing ROI in terms of productivity because it's a lot faster to find stuff. Um, you don't waste your time looking through folders and folders and folders. Hopefully, using Claude Code and basically you're automating all of that stuff. So you're losing less time every day looking for stuff. Um, the right kind of search through a copilot also helps you do reuse because you can find. I actually have done that before. I don't need to redo it, so I can also get better reuse. So I think on an individual productivity basis, there's clearly benefits that are already being seen when people are deploying agents. I think that deployment of I'm sorry, of co-pilots. When you deploy agents, I think you start seeing individual processes becoming more efficient. I think you start seeing more and more things that are being automated. Like say, I change something in a product plan. What happens to the rest of my Gantt chart? Instead of having to manually move all those things back and forth, the AI will do all that for you. And that already is in beta at one of the PLM products. And that is of immense value. PTC already has an agent on top of the document vault. So I can look through all of my history of all my CAD parts and find stuff super easy in order to do reuse and so forth. Team Center came out with an agent for lifecycle analysis. So I can start looking across multiple systems and find any problems I might have in terms of the digital product passport and how to get the thing to market without violating some European regulation or whatever. So we're already seeing these improvements. I think what shocked me or impressed me in the startup market has just been some of the brilliant ideas on let's rethink the way we're thinking about PLM. Like when I talked to Elevating Patterns, they were saying, well, what we really need is a graph database that sits on top of all this and is able to get the big picture without being bogged down in the details of relational databases. Um, if I there's also one of my favorites was TD Engine. So that's a his name is Jeff Tao. He's got a platform which was originally an IoT platform. Well, it was originally an IoT platform. Now it's becoming more of an analytics platform, but he calls it Snapchat for IoT. So he can literally, it'll create all the graphs automatically. And if you don't like the graph, you just swipe it away, like on Tinder or something. I don't like that one.
Mhm.
Give me another one. So you can just get rid of all the graphs, and it'll redo another one, and redo another one, and you don't have to sit there trying to figure out, well, what the x-axis should be this data, and it already knows all the possibilities, so it's just presenting them to you. So I find that really interesting. I think we've already seen, in terms of market movement and market dynamics, we've already seen massive consolidation in terms of simulation, right? You saw Altair being acquired by Siemens, MSC being bought from Hexagon by Cadence. So I think that the CAM market is probably the next one that'll see some consolidation. You already have Hexagon and Sandvik that have a pretty big majority of those, but I think from what I'm told by experts in the CAM arena, there still are like hundreds and hundreds of little tiny CAM solutions out there. So I'm thinking that there's probably someone's going to become a unicorn just by coming up with a solution that does the best for everybody and kind of reduces the complexity there, because that's an area of extraordinarily complex mathematics, if you're familiar with it, which I'm not. I only know from talking to friends of mine and experts. But I think
Mhm.
that there's a shocking amount of mathematics that are super interesting, and I think there will be some major breakthroughs there as well in terms of manufacturability. Because the other thing that's interesting is that the advent of additive manufacturing um, has not removed the need for subtractive manufacturing at all. There still is the need to
It's true.
do classic milling and stuff. And in fact, a lot of times, I didn't know this, but a lot of times when you do additive, there's too much material, so you have to go in with a milling machine anyway to remove the
Mm.
extra material that the 3D printer put there. So ultimately, you're going to have this marriage between the two, and then I don't think there's any solutions that know that. I don't think there's nothing off the shelf that knows how to do additive and subtractive at the same time, because the mathematics are just insane. So yeah, that's where I see a lot of that's where I see stuff that's really awesome, and I
Mhm.
see other things that are more of an opportunity.
Nice. And regarding like these days and all the buzzwords that we see, is there any in particular that makes your skin crawl or not?
Um, I'm not a big fan of the virtual twins, since we already have digital twin, but I'm not gonna. That's a little political, right? I um, I think that well, I think saying that you can vibe code all the way to an engineering app is insanity. That's just not, vibe coding in an engineering context doesn't really work. It's not vibe coding. You can use AI to do some of this, the scaffolding and the brainstorming on what an app would look like. But at the end of the day, you're gonna have to code it yourself. I did a project for Capgemini, sorry, for Deloitte last year, before vibe coding was even a word. I did this last year, and I had 2 weeks to build a full program for computer vision. So if you're a scientist and you're looking at a bunch of two-dimensional microscopic images, and you're trying to determine if the person's got cancer or not, you want to automate that, right? It's just image recognition. So basically, they asked me, okay, use a C++ library and use a Java library, and then give me an application within 2 weeks that is able to read the scans and do stuff with them. And I used vibe coding for it. I succeeded, and I'm not a programmer, but I also found that I spent an incredible amount of time with the testing stuff that didn't work at all. Like building the
Mm.
test for Java was fundamentally broken, and I had to either comment it out or fix it myself. I found that the dependencies check would also became a thing. So I found that like AI will go down a certain road, and at one point it can't really turn around, so it's sort of stuck in the corner, and it can only like vibrate between two options, and it can't really, even if you tell it to back out, it's like, no, 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 I can't. And so if you want A, no, 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 but you should try B. I already did B. Well, then try A. But I tried A. Well, then try B. So it just, so yeah, I don't think you'll ever, we're not at the point where you can actually build an engineering program with all the complexity of engineering. That being said, hopefully at one point, AI was built on these large language models, and the large language models were trained primarily on Reddit and the internet, right? Basically, they just looked at the internet, and particularly Reddit. And engineering is not Reddit, right? That was actually another interview I had. I think it was Leo AI.
Yes, Leo
It was
AI.
Maurer that told me that. And what would be interesting is if we can finally get 3D geometry to become understandable by an LLM, because then you actually could do something text to CAD that actually made sense, and not the stuff that is being done today, which is pure marketing. But we're not there yet. Now, I'm going to talk to Ron tomorrow, but Ron Fritz, who stepped down as CEO, but he's still the chairman of the board at Texoft 3D. They develop hoops. They're they're pretty much used by every company every graphics company on the planet. Ron introduced a new AI concept for 3D into Texoft 3D in the new release. So I can't even talk about it yet because I don't know about it. But what I read sounds promising, at least from a visualization point of view, not necessarily the hardcore geometry point of view. So it remains an open question. Yeah, it's getting long, isn't it?
But
Are you enjoying this?
Yes, of course. As I told in the beginning, it's really an honor for me, like to get someone like you, and for us to have this conversation.
It's my
But
pleasure.
the list of topics and the questions that I wanted to address, they have been like diminishing. So I believe we're almost in the end. There is a question I really would like to ask you, and I also have made like to my most experienced guests. That's the following, and that comes from the fact that uh, in LinkedIn you have like a lot of people that recommended you, and they say, "Oh, Fino is the greatest man. He knows a lot of stuff, and so on and so on and so on." And considering your career in PLM, and particularly that it was like so broad. I mean, it was you were like not just like a software architect, not someone who makes sales. You
No.
you lived like every single part of it. Is there like any area where you still say, "Oh, I still want to do like something more," like inside or outside PLM?
Oh, there's always more stuff to see. There's more countries to go visit, and there's more museums to see, and so forth. In terms of PLM, I never really became a CAD guy. I mean, I said that I created CAD adapters, but I
Hmm.
never actually, other than doing a fillet in Pro E 100 years ago, I never actually learned how to use the CAD tools. And I'll even confess, I've never really used a PLM tool either. I know what they do. I know, I've read the docs, I've written the docs, but in terms of actually doing a change, I was never, responsible for that. I was more making sure the thing, if 100 people doing that change didn't make the system fall over, right? Um, so yeah, I guess the one I would say I regret that I never had the time, or perhaps took the time to become a practitioner, a hands-on practitioner of CAD or PLM. Um, but my experience derives more from looking at the overall, more of a higher level view, and optimizing infrastructures, and now more optimizing the way people think about things, and the way they implement AI and those things, in order to do them in an optimized manner.
That's a really interesting answer because I was not expecting that. That was really interesting. I have now like some bonus questions,
Ah,
and
cool. Do I get a Sangre beer as a result, or
the first the first one that I have is the following, because when I was checking your profile, I noticed that you have wrote some books, some like some
yeah,
that were like PLM related, but also there is at least one which is not. Where did the idea came from for writing that? Did you
Yeah,
did you just wake up and you think, oh, today I'm going to write a book, a fiction book?
almost literally. I had a dream one night. I had a dream that it was like this woman and a man near a car and another guy up on a hill with a gun or something looking down. And a very cinematic kind of dream. And when I woke up, this dream kind of stuck with me. And I had names in my head for Gramble and Sophie or Zoe. And then I had this other name, Samuel. And they wouldn't let me go. They kept talking to me. Said, "But I did this, and then I did that," and so I said, "Well, I better, before to get them stop talking in my head, I better just write it down." And then that's sort of how I germinated the story of the Gramble Chronicles, Sophie's Playlist. Is I just they were talking to me. Those voices sadly went silent once I published. I briefly, Samuel told me what he was thinking about, and I wrote that down. But it kind of went all over the place, and then I got really busy just trying to keep the lights on, and it's something I want to get back to. But yeah, it actually germinated in a dream, and then the characters basically told me their stories, and I just wrote down what they were saying.
Amazing, amazing. Uh, um, Also, let's imagine that, for example, like in today's world, a lot of people continue to go like to colleges, for example, like mechanical engineering. Um, I also, please correct me if I'm wrong, but your like initial like academic background was also
Mechanical
mechanical
engineering.
engineering.
Yeah, that's it.
Um, what advice would you give like to the people, like the young men and women who are now starting like a mechanical engineering degree, taking like into consideration that the world today is very different from it was like 30 years ago?
We actually we talk about this on nearly all the podcasts I do with founders because I think it's very interesting to get their opinion. And if I summarize more or less what I've heard over the 8 or 9 interviews I've run, um, we will always need first principles. And we also, again, humans, we have our own way of looking at the world that a computer will never have. So in order to be a good engineer or even a great engineer, you still have to know engineering. You need to know what a number looks reasonable in terms of torque or whatever the metric is. So in order you can say to the AI, actually that number is wrong. There's no way that that's the right thing because already when you're just doing text, you can look at it, the AI response and say, well, no, George Washington was not the president of Bolivia, right? From when it hallucinates. Whereas if you're looking at numbers, if you're not an engineer, that could hallucinate and you wouldn't even know unless you were an engineer to say, no, that's not possible. The formula is like this, and that result is the orders of magnitude away from the result I was expecting. So it couldn't possibly be right. Um, so I think that the first principles are extremely important, but I don't think that you will survive without software skills, without understanding how software works, without understanding how AI works and how to best leverage an LLM and AI tools to do your job. You need to be a communicator because if you can't communicate what you're doing, somebody else is going to communicate better and they're going to get that job. So I think it's very important to work on communication people skills, on programming skills to some degree, AI skills, absolutely, because that will be it's basically a no starter if you don't have that. And then still maintaining the basic concepts of math in order to understand the formulas, in order to make well to know whether the results you're getting back are false or not. And then what hopefully the to actually as a sort of add on to the question of where do we go from here in engineering, hopefully at one point all the grunt work, all the boring stuff, all the plumbing that we use or do like 70% of the time as engineers, which is just all the stuff that we're going to delegate to the AI. Hopefully all that time we save, we could just be creative and innovative. We could do things in engineering and think about new ideas and become ideally we'd be in this post scarcity kind of PLM or design where we can create these incredible things and let the AI deal with the mundane details. But to get there, I think you still need some fundamentals. Like I said, I think you need people skills,
Hmm.
you need to have computer skills, and then you need to still have the fundamentals.
I'm not sure if you have an opinion on this topic, but do you believe if the schools are like reshaping their curriculum like fast enough to like taking into consideration the developments of these days?
I couldn't say. I don't follow every program that out there. Obviously, Stanford and MIT are going to be ahead of the curve, right? Because that's
Hmm.
where most of the innovation is happening. I mean, I live in France. My kids are in the French school system, and I can say it's definitely not ahead of the curve anymore. It was, but it's no longer the head of the curve. I mean, I couldn't believe they weren't even doing trig until just before graduating. And trig, I did it
Hmm.
back in junior high.
Yes, yes.
So I find that in terms of math, and maybe it's just France, or maybe it's a more global problem, but I find that the math has really regressed, which is of deep concern. Um, in terms of AI, they got a little smattering of warnings, like fake news, but they weren't really taught how to use an LLM and how to do prompt engineering, which is really important even in high school. I mean, they knew how to cheat, right, and get a good result on their paper by cheating. They didn't know how they did it, and they certainly didn't know how to get an original non-cheating result to a problem that was innovative, and which is the real goal of using LLMs. So I don't know, other than motivating them to cheat and get a better grade than the guy sitting next to them that didn't use the LLM, I'm not sure that they're getting the best at it that we could possibly give them. And again, I can't speak to the university system. My kid is not in engineering, unfortunately. He's doing literature. So in literature, well, so that's what's interesting about being the dad of a teenager, right? We had lunch a couple of weeks ago, and he said, "But Dad, I'm kind of worried because I decided to do this classical education. It's one of the last classical education programs in Europe where you learn
Hmm.
Greek and Latin and classical literature." I said, "But it's not adapted to the real world. I mean, I'm not learning AI and all this stuff. I mean, I said, well, maybe the role is to understand that stuff, understand where we are, and then be the person who fills in the gap. Because there have to be people that understand the old way of thinking and the new way of thinking. A lot of us are just going to be concentrated on the new way. Some people will be stuck in the old way, and someone's going to be there to help guide those people along the path towards the new way. Um, so yeah, it's complex. I think it's only been 3 years for LLMs, right? It was 2022, 2023.
Yes,
It's
yes.
only been 3 years. A university
3 years.
program probably takes a dozen years to change, right? So I think it's an evolution. It's just we'll see which universities are quickest to pick up on it, like MIT and Stanford and probably UC Berkeley, and which ones that are going to be a bit slower. You know, I
Okay.
can say I think the I saw an article on LinkedIn that my favorite university, University of Florida, has the biggest AI computer in the American university system. They just got it
Oh.
delivered 2 months ago. So go Gators! That's really cool. Um,
Hmm.
so I don't know. Maybe they're doing pretty good, even though they're not MIT or UC Berkeley or Stanford.
If you had the opportunity to interview 3 people, living or dead, who would you choose and why?
um, let's see. So 3 people living or dead. I mean, I got to hear Stephen Hawking talk at a web summit a year before he died. But I certainly would have liked to talk to him and understand this whole string theory stuff, and I'd like to get his opinion on where we are because he died before LLMs existed, right? I think it would be fascinating to hear what Stephen Hawking would have to say about all that. Um, I'd also like to talk to Thomas Pynchon because he writes these awesome books and nobody even knows who he is. So just because I think he must be a fascinating person. I just read
Hmm.
his latest book, Shadow Ticket, which was a mashup of 3 of his previous books, Against the Day, Gravity's Rainbow, and Inherent Vice, and I found it a lot of fun. But I think I'd like to talk to him because nobody knows who he is.
Hmm.
Um, and I don't know. Then I'd probably want to talk to a musician. I don't know if it'd be Kurt Cobain because he'd probably be too wasted to make a coherent sentence. Jimmy probably the same. Maybe John Coltrane because John went through a lot. He was when he played with Miles originally. He became a heroin addict, and Miles told him he was going to kick him out of the band if he didn't kick heroin. And he went back to North Carolina and went through a hell of 2 months, got clean, came back, and he was so good that Miles said, "Well, you're too good. You've got to do your own thing." And so he's the one who pushed him, gave him his first producer, and then John Coltrane became John Coltrane. And yet he still struggled with addiction, and he died of a heart attack at a relatively young age,
Mhm.
before even the '60s ran out. So I'd like to understand. I think I'd like to talk to John. I'd like to understand what made him tick. Why, how did he do that, and then why didn't he change his like he basically got addicted to sugar, and he got fatter and fatter because he was eating so much sugar, and basically between overwork and having all this sugar and stuff, his heart couldn't handle it. So I'd like to go back and then tell him, hey, chill on the sugar so that you live a couple more decades. That would be cool.
Mhm. Last question that I have.
Those, yeah.
Last question that I have prepared, and it's a bit similar to this one. If you had the opportunity to meet God, like an omniscient being, what three questions would you ask?
Why did you
What
create?
still troubles you the most today?
Why did you create Donald Trump? Um,
That's
why
interesting
did
because
you?
my last guest also made something similar.
Yeah. Why, if you're an omniscient and loving God, why would you allow things like the Shoah to exist? That was always a big. I know that Dostoevsky tried to explain that in the famous chapter of Brothers Karamazov, but it still bothers me. And was there a Big Bang or not? Is there? What's the solution to the Fermi paradox? Is there life out there, or are we the only ones? Because we don't know. It's still, I mean, we still have movies and books about the Fermi paradox, but we still don't know. In this huge universe, is it empty and we're the only sentient beings, which is kind of insane? Or are there really evil ones, like in the three-body problem of Cixin Liu? Or are there friendly ones? I think I'd probably ask him about the Fermi paradox.
Interesting to know, Michael. Um, well, I guess that's it. It's we had time to discuss a lot of stuff.
Did we get through all your questions?
Yes, basically
Wow.
in hour and a half. So yes, in the
That's
end of the
great.
day,
It
it
was
was
fun.
it was reasonable. Um, so Michael, once again, it's been a pleasure to have you here.
It's my pleasure
Um,
to meet you, Pedro. Really great job preparing this and everything. I appreciate it.
I always prepare my because I think from all of the guests that I have, every single one, I mm, I believe they are great people. Ones for some reason and like others for other reason. But my way to think is the following: I will have only like one chance to meet these people. I have to prepare well. I only have
Well,
one
I hope there'll
chance.
be another chance. I hope I can come see you and have a beer or something someday in
Yes,
Portugal.
who knows? Maybe. So if you ever come to Portugal, please tell me because
Well,
we will
where?
drink beer.
Lisbon or Porto?
Lisbon and Porto are like the two big cities. I'm a born. I'm in the middle of them.
Oh, okay.
I am
Near
from
Sintra?
the region of Coimbra. Not sure if you know Coimbra city.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
But
I've read about it. Okay.
like, it's basically like the first capital of Portugal. So it's
Right.
still like a proud of ourselves. So we were like the first capital of Portugal, and I'm
Okay.
from that region.
That's great. Well, I hope I
Um,
can come visit. I'll look you up. I'll let you
yes,
know.
yes. Coimbra has like the University of Coimbra, which is one of the oldest universities
Yeah.
in Europe.
I think it's
Yes,
4 or 5, right? After the Sorbonne and Leuven and the Cambridge Oxford, I think is just after
yes,
those.
yes.
Maybe
Probably so.
maybe the one in Madrid might be slightly older, but yeah, you guys are so in the top 10 for sure. Maybe the top five,
Yes,
top
yes.
six.
I believe so. So yes, wonderful
Oh no,
city
Bologna.
to
Bologna
meet.
is also super old. I think Bologna is the oldest one, isn't it? I believe Bologna has the oldest one. I think
Probably, but not
Bologna,
sure.
Sorbonne, and then Leuven, and then the two in England, and then something in the Iberian Peninsula, whether it's Coimbra or if it's Madrid, I'm not,
Hmm.
or Barca, I'm not sure.
So yes, I hope like one day we can meet like physically, and I
That would
can
be
pay you a
great.
beer or so.
That would be me.
just just like a curiosity. Just I was not prepared for this, but your nickname Fino is what when we in Coimbra or in the north of Portugal, when we want like a cup of beer, we ask for a Fino.
Okay.
It's exactly like your name. So that's interesting.
Well, I know, but there's also the lowest grade of sherry in Jerez is Fino sherry. It just
Mm,
means the one at 14%. So you still have the mushrooms that grow on the surface. Over 15%, the alcohol content kills the mushrooms, and then you have Harvey's Bristol Cream, for example, which is at 18%. But the lower stuff is called Fino, also.
mm-hmm.
I chose my Fino is short for Finocchiaro. Nobody can pronounce Finocchiaro other than Italians or Portuguese. And so and unfortunately the French couldn't pronounce Michael. They would say Michel, Michael, Mikako. They would just massacre my name. So I said, you know what, Fino is easy to pronounce, so we're just going to go with that. So that's and in French, the funny thing is Finaud, which is pronounced the same way, Fino. It means someone who doesn't quite follow the process, sort of
Oh,
always finding it, going around the
interesting.
corners. And it's not necessarily a positive connotation, but it doesn't necessarily contradict the way I do things either. So I guess I have to assume it.
um, well, also to the people who are watching us, and I hope they will be like watching this podcast episode. um I hope you have liked it. I really
Yeah, we
enjoyed
really hope you too.
being it with Michael. And well, that's it, I guess. Michael, I don't know if you have like some kind of final words or
I don't know, just you don't be afraid of AI, just embrace it. It's going to be here. It's not going to go away, and your job depends on being good at it. So don't shy away.
Mhm. So
Stay
that's it.
frosty and stay frosty.
Yes, stay frosty. So um to everyone, bye, and well, see you later. Bye.